The 7 zones of Mindflow Economics. That's gonna be the subject of today's chapter on the business library. And I have Dr. Charles on here because I haven't developed them. I'm actually quite curious about them myself, so I won't say too much about what they are about because I'm probably gonna say something wrong. Tell you guys live, we don't want that. So, Charles, what made you like come up with the 7 zones and like just did they come about, just as a bit of an intro for everybody listening, including myself?
Sure. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. I've been looking forward to this time with you, and it's going to be an exciting and have some fun together. But my background is I'm a plastic surgeon, and so everything that I do stems from the word creativity. All right, but because I have a past, all of us have a story to tell, and if it's a big story, then you got to make sure the whole world hears it. And so my background of growing up was a very dysfunctional family background. All of us have stories, but I lived in a bubble mass, which is really it was a reactionary type of mode bubble where everything that hurt me, I lived in that space because it was always, more than having good responses to what was happening around me. So I developed a lot of wounding in my growing up years. My childhood was never smooth. And because of that, I was all the time running away from what I did not want to be. And that was my biggest fear, was becoming like my father. And I used to get really upset when somebody used to say, or anyone would say, he's a chip of the old block. And that really would upset me because it was so bad for me. And failure was my way of life because I went through secondary school, and every time a report came back, it was all in red. And I used to hide behind the wall, waiting for my father to sign the report card. Instead, he would take it and throw it right across the hall. And I had to go and pick it up 3 times a year because it was always in red.
Oh, Jesus.
Yeah, so really it was a very fractured childhood growing up. And as a surgeon myself, all of us have scars, and these are emotional scars that one develops during your childhood and growing up days. But if you don't get those scars healed, they end up in what is called contractures. And that limits your movement. Your functionality becomes disturbed. And that's what happened to me. I developed contractures all along my life's way. And as a surgeon, when I get burns and scar contractures, it requires surgery. You just have to release it. But I had no one to turn to. And this is the thing about being doctors. You see, we have this fixed mindset, man. We get up in the morning, we go to work, we see the patients, we operate, we get back. It's like a TikTok machine that just goes on, and you're totally oblivious to the world and the surroundings. And I grew up in that atmosphere. You see, I had nobody to reach out to, struggle with it. And you asked me, how did these 7 zones come into being? And that was after 5 years of seeing my daughter through dental school. It really exhausted me. And I became totally a huge vacuum inside of me because I didn't know where to go. And so I left my home and I went out and lived for 2 years. I took a room. But it was during that time I was going back. Socrates said these words. He said, an unexamined life is not worth living. And it was during that time I examined my life. And this is for all those who are listening in, that if you reach a crossroads in your life, you've got no purpose in your life, you don't know what's the meaning of your life, you've got no vision in your life, I'm talking to you because that's what happened to me. And in those 2 years, I came across this quote, Mass, that really revolutionized my thinking. And it was by Viktor Frankl. At least it's attributed to him. And he said these words, it was a quote, and he said that between a stimulus and a response is a space. And I found that space. And in that space, he says, we have the power to choose our response. And that response can have growth and freedom. And then I realized that my whole thinking, my whole conditioning of my mind was totally on a reaction mood. that was more impulsive, instinctive. I was having collateral damage. I was bringing up my children the way I thought I was bringing them right, but I was playing the same game my father did on me. And so I sat down, and as a doctor, as you know, creativity being my DNA, I sat down and mapped out these 7 zones that meant to me. So I really designed it for myself. And it started off in that space, the zone of mindfulness, awareness, self-awareness. Who was I in that present moment? What was my calling? And I think a lot of my life was when I was called by God nearly 20 years ago. And so I'm a big one for visionary. I'm a visionary. Visioneering for me is the real prime motivator for where you are to where you want to go. And I found that vision, without vision, when there is no vision, everybody perishes. And I was really going through a dead end, Mass, because I didn't have a vision of my life until I was called. And that's when I founded the Asia Pacific Consultation on Discipleship. Okay. So I wrote these 7 zones, and basically it's a powerful kind of ecosystem that puts 7 zones of responses so that your response in life are mindful responses. Remember that, in the words of Jonathan Lockwood, he says that challenges, our lives are defined not by our challenges, but how we respond to those challenges. And I realized that all the stimuli, the challenges in my life, I was reacting more than responding. And that really revolutionized my thinking. So I took the words creative, because creativity is the currency of the brain. It's a currency of the universe, you see. For me, everything in the brain works on creativity. So I took the words creative, and with each letter, I wrote down the zone. So C is creativity, R is resplendence, and I'll explain it to you. And then E is emotional spirituality, A is awareness, T is tolerance, I is intention, V is visionary, and finally E is the operating system that gets these 7 zones going, called ergonomics, which is really the science of work efficiency. How do you get your brain working efficiently so that at the end of the day you still have energy and don't burn out and don't have mental exhaustion? So really it is a reaction operating system that delivers mindful responses so that we make real good choices that matter to both performance and the abundant life. Basically, that's what it is. So it's a reactionary operating system, and I think it's magic for those who are really caught in the blue, and in this bubble of reaction.
Can you quickly run us through like the 7 steps, just one after the other, so everybody has it?
Yeah. So as I said, it's the mnemonics comes from the word creative. So creativity is the first one, because that is really the currency that the brain operates on, because you come up with an idea, you're all the time creating ideas. But ideas to me have no value unless they have value to it. You take it to the marketplace and they become innovation. So innovation is the growth of any engineering process. So creativity is the first one. The mind is always in a creative mode, okay? And that's a healthy mindset to have. Because the moment you tap into the zone of creativity, you're thinking out of the box. You're thinking out of your mind. And I believe in this M formula, Mass, which is, what's in your mind, you fix it, but don't live from your mind. Take it to your heart, because that's where manifestation takes its residence. All right. So that's very important for me. The M formula, mindfulness and manifestation. So that's creativity. That's the currency that the brain operates on. So you're always in a creative mode. And then R is resplendence. That's my go-to zone. I mean, in the hospital, we have all different types of zones: yellow zone, red zone, green zone. So we live in zones. All right. And I'm a big believer in systems, you see. So perform resplendence is the wow. We're all having moments in our life where there are certain moments which are really wow moments. You know what I mean? For me, it's the sunset. When I have a tough day, I go out because we live by the sea. And when I'm watching the sunset, I enter into this zone of resplendence, which is really where your remembering self takes over. You remember those moments in the whole life where there were dazzling moments, And I think that's the most refreshing moment for me, the zone of resplendence. I never heard of the word before until I was driving.
It sounds very fancy.
Yeah, because I was in the car driving back from work, and then I looked up at a billboard, and it was a hotel. It was a big mall that was promoting a spa, and they were saying, "Welcome to the resplendence of this place." And I quickly Googled it, and it was majesty, and I realized that there were so many moments in my life which I can remember were really dazzling moments until today. I still remember there was a time when I was coming back from a town. This is about like 20 years ago, and I still remember. You see, Daniel Kahneman talks about two sides of the self: the remembering self and the experienced self. And we stopped. It was about midnight, and we got out, and the sky was just punctured with stars, and there was not a single dark spot. Can you imagine? Until today, I can recall the date and the day, because it was so that's resplendent. And I believe that if we can really tune ourselves into that kind of a zone, we will be so charged for the next day and refreshed and re-energized. Okay, so that's R. E is emotional spirituality. And I think it's very important that we have spirit man balance in our life. I hear so much about work life balance. I worked for 40 years in the marketplace as a surgeon. And for me, when you talk about work life mass, if there's no spirit man, it's a plank. When I go and do my exercises, the guy says go into a plank mode, and that's really for your core. But when you talk about life, if you don't have a spirit man in the center, there's no fulcrum. And that's really what keeps us spiritual beings, as we all are, in balance. That's the harmony within. And so if we don't feed your spirit man, you'll find that you're living a very dull and emotionless life. Okay, so that's basically emotional spirituality. How do you really zone in into your emotions, but always mindful of the presence of God, the spirit man in you? Okay, and that feeds you into the awareness zone, which is A. And awareness, self-awareness is very much like mindfulness, as being mindful of the present moment where you are. And that helps you make a mindful response, because then you don't trigger off your reaction mode and then starts hurting people around. So self-awareness is that mode, which is A. And then after it comes T, which is tolerance. I'm still working on all these zones because I could never tolerate people around me. I would always flare up, and people would say, Charles, why are you such an angry man all the time? Until someone told me it's better to be happy than to be, right all the time, because I wanted to be right. That's my personality, right?
Yeah, you can sometimes it's right or happy. That's the two choices you have.
Absolutely. And so when this person said, it's better to be happy than to be right all the time, and then I realized I'm on the wrong mode, man, that kind of thing. And I was hurting myself, And then I is intention, which to me is the most powerful zone, because the intention means decision. You're making your decisions. What is your intent in life? If we don't have that intention to really succeed and end up with your vision completely, completed, you're failed in yourself. So intention is important, because then you start examining yourself. Why are you doing what you're doing? And why do you get up every day? And so I always say that when you get up every day, keep the 3 beds in front of you, BED, the mnemonics for build your system, engineer your vision, and then define your future. The whole thing is so very important to define your destiny. And then finally, it comes to V, which is visioneering. That's the engineering process that takes your vision through to where you are, to where you want to be. And you need to master that whole process. And finally, E is the ergonomics of the whole operating system. You see, I never knew so much about ergonomics until in my plastic surgical career, because when you design, for example, you've heard of ergonomics chair, designed so that you don't have backaches, you're comfortable. Now, I do breast augmentation, right? So when there's an implant, it's designed ergonomically so that it really works well no matter what exercise or whatever is being done. It fits nicely into the patient's breast, you see. So there's ergonomics there. And so I put this all together so that anyone who is troubled, who is having in a point of crossroads, do not know their future, the vision is not there, this is a go-to operating system where you're mindfully responding to all the challenges that hit you every day, so that you're on the positive side, and your performance excellence is peak, and then at the end of the day you end up with an abundant life and not one that is of poverty stricken.
I do recall the first time we talked about this, I was like, this is a whole lot. And then you specified you're not doing all 7 at once. So I was like, oh, thank you. Because this seems like I'm gonna just be stressed out. Like 10 different, 7 different places to be exact with my mind.
Well, the beauty about this is the cross discipline, that interaction between the zones. I mean, that's the most powerful thing about the ergonomics of it. You see, it's just like when you go for exercising or cross training, you got your muscles moving, you got your hands moving, and all. It's like cross training, right? So cross disciplinary thinking. When you get the zones moving in together, it's exciting because when I'm thinking of mindfulness, at the same time, I'm also thinking of intention. What is my intent in this present moment? What am I trying to do? And why am I doing what I'm doing? You know what I mean? Because everybody talks about the how and the why. I'm a big believer of what. So when I'm training my surgeons, right, I always tell them to look for what is wrong before you can do it right. Because you can't operate on a cleft lip and operate twice. You only got that one chance to make it right. And so I believe that if we spend our time asking ourselves, what am I doing wrong that is keeping me away from this flow of life? And that's where I came up with mind flow as opposed to mindset. And this is something that, it's exciting. I think it's creativity in elegance.
And one word you mentioned multiple times is systems.
Yeah.
And a great thing I think you said, I've heard you say it a couple of times, is building systems, not setting goals. I can't remember if you flipped it.
Well, that's
but why is
yeah.
that so important?
Well, because my background is building systems, because in the medical field, the whole body is full of systems. There are 11 operating systems. And all the time we are building it. You see, when someone comes and has a problem with the nervous system, we are building that. So a system is more accountable, it's more structured, and you can monitor it as you progress along the way. You see, so you can have somebody with a very weak muscle imbalance, and then when you start working on paces and you have a system there, they build up the strength. So too with the brain. The brain has got its own brain power, and you can build it up as you have a system of doing so. But goals, all my life I've had goals, and I'm always shifting the goalposts. You see, so, and goals are usually 6 months, 1 year, 2 years. They're all short-term goals. But when you build a system, it's for life. And this is very, very important for people to realize. When you build a system for yourself, for example, this particular life zone system, it's for life. It takes you from where you are to where you want to be, but it requires skills, and it requires this one word mass, practice. So as professionals, all of us do nothing but practice, practice, practice. That's why you get somebody like Tiger Woods, who is an excellent golfer, because he practices that. You see, so without practice, nobody can succeed through life. In fact, creativity is the hidden measure of success in life. And if you're always thinking and always thinking of your own responses as opposed to reactions, you will have a much more better, happier, healthy life. And I've realized I've paid the price for that, living in the wrong mode. And you can actually build you talk about neuroplasticity today, build that responsive pathway so that you're always making mindful responses, which are deliberate, they are thought through, they are consciously made, and those decisions will help you make right choices in life. And I think that's the key at the end of the day. Are you excited about what I'm saying?
Yes, I am. And it's funny you mentioned Tiger Woods, because the other day I was listening to The Diary of a CEO, a book by Stephen Banelli, where they talked about Tiger Woods intentionally actually getting worse at golf because he knew that was a better system he could develop. It just required him to forget a whole bunch of the stuff he had been doing. So he did like this to raise up much higher. So
Right.
he actually had to replace the system because he found there was a better one out there.
Absolutely.
So love that you mentioned his name just by accident.
Yeah, but this is why perspective shifts in perspectives is so important in life. When something is not going right, that's why I say find out what is wrong and then shift your perspectives. And for me, it was a big breakthrough when I found out my space. And in that space, I was making wrong decisions that were hurting more than building myself in first. When I had my open heart surgery 12 years ago, I paid the price of living in a reaction mode because everything was against me, and I was never a happy guy. But the stress, the highly tense emotions that I was going through paid a price. I damaged my vessels to my heart without knowing. And when I finished it, and I got this Heart Talk channel, which is my podcast channel. And I was in Sydney, and my first guest was a clinical psychologist. And she said these words to me, man. She said, Charles, be kind to yourself. And then I realized, what on earth is she talking about?
What have she done? Did you go out drinking before the podcast?
Exactly.
What's going on
so
here?
I thought, okay. So I went to a bar and had a nice bottle of beer, and I said, okay, Charles, be kind to yourself.
It's one way of doing it.
Yeah, but today we are living in a world. I mean, having worked 40 years, and today we've got doctors who are burning out, mentally exhausted. People are at crossroads with their life. They don't know what to do. And that's why I believe that the real source of life, and at the end, is having a vision. A vision-driven life is one that ends up with the abundance of life. And if you don't have a vision for yourself, if nobody has a vision, it's going to be disaster. And I think this is why, when you have an operating system that you can skill yourself and live through that from those 7 zones, is a much better life. It's a much happier life. And I've taken the price to do that. But every zone that I wrote down from the word creative was to help myself first. And now I realize the moment I go to the seaside, I'm in resplendent zone. And when I'm having my time or mindfulness, it's a beautiful practice where you really seek into the deep things of God. If you're a spiritual guy. But yeah, I'm excited about this, and I hope that many would be able to realize that the good things in life are still out there. And I've always said to people, when they talk about I'm enough, I say no. I was created for more. And that hunger for more in life is what gets you going up in the morning every day. And that's the most important thing in life, is why do you get out of bed, and what do you want to do with your life? These are questions. And I've been alone in my life all the time. I never had friends around to talk to. It was always surgery home. But now I realize that life is beautiful.
It truly is. And it does come down to our perspective at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
Life it doesn't really change. It's still the same. It's just how we view it.
Absolutely. And that's why even work, my lens that I talk to my surgeons or when I'm training them, I mean, in the Hebrew scriptures, right? Work and worship are the same word, avodah. It's how you approach your work. And if you realize that, the greatest gift in life, Mas, is the ability to earn. It's ability to work. It's the greatest gift. And if I had a choice between being rich and being wealthy, choose wealthy.
Yeah, please. Thank you very much.
And everybody talks about mental health. I said, no, it's mental wealth. The brain is such a fascinating organ that we can actually train it, and be the boss of your own brain. And actually, I've learned a lot from my Heart Talk guests. And I realized that there's more to life than just, going to work and back home. But the question is, how do we make the right choices in life? This is
That's
the
always the
essential
question.
It's always the question. And I believe right now that the way to get there is by mindful responses. If you're very careful about the way you think through your responses as opposed to reacting it, you'll make a much better choice. And
I can get behind that.
Pardon?
I can get behind that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is why it's a pleasure to be able to share this with you, because I came up with this thing called the Chi transformation factor. And that is, we all talk about hope. For me, hope is a currency of the future in the present. And so when you put creativity and hope together, that's where innovation comes into being. And so the CHI factor is where the whole process of living is in harmony with itself, you see. So creativity is really something very important for success.
Now that we talked about the system for like 25 minutes, something close to that at least. How would the person sitting there out listening, how would you recommend that person to go out and start utilizing this system?
Well, I think they first need to recognize where they are. What's wrong? And that's what I did with my own life. I sat down and wrote down what's wrong. Where's the block? At what point in my life now do I need to make a decision to change my life's pathway? Until you realize that you've reached that point and there is a return to life. There's no such thing as point of no return. And the question is to recognize what is going wrong. Be honest with yourself. Mirrors don't lie and shadows never leave you. And when you look into the mirror and realize, I looked into the mirror and realized what a rotten human being I had become, because I was molded by my own scar contractures and I couldn't think out of the box. And that's why Mindflow Ergonomics came, because you fix it in your mind about the good things of God, but you got to take it to your heart. You live from your heart. So if anyone is listening in and they say, yeah, this is it, I'm blocked, I don't know where to go, I've got no future in my life, I don't see my vision, this is why they need to come into this system and really work at it, get skilled at it, practice it. No matter which zone you're in, you will realize it's like a cogwheel, you see, and each one plays into the other. You could come into the intention zone where it comes to decision making, and then you realize, what is my intent? Do I really want it? That hunger for want and more. And then they can go on from there. So I think it's really recognizing where they are at that point, and then realizing there is a way out. Just a few months ago, Matt, a senior clinical pathologist here took a life, allegedly because of working environment. Everybody wants a safe environment to work, but the only safe environment that I am concerned about is ourselves. And if you don't wake up with the right amount of thinking positively about yourself, that you'll be able to go through the day, you're in for trouble. And that's why I always say, build a system when you get up. And that system is the response operating system. How am I going to respond to the challenges of the day? All right, that's very important. And once you're in the right mode, then build that mode. Don't let the reactive mode come in. Daniel Kanahan talks about systems 1 and 2. So this is system 2. Build it, you see, and make that your main go-to goal. That any challenge that comes in, it's not about our challenges. We are not defined by these challenges. We are defined by how we respond to them. And I think that if that attitude of approach comes in, I think there'll be much better people in this life.
I love the emphasis you put on practice. Like, you're practicing this system, because I think, including myself, a lot of us fall mistake or fall off. This is not working. We've done it for a week. It's new. Surprise,
Right.
surprise. Things normally don't do that. It would be kind of a miracle if it did.
Right.
And then we go into that negative spiral, probably because we haven't built a very solid system or foundation for that system to thrive on.
Right. Absolutely. I mean, this is why, as professionals, the word practice is part of the DNA. You can't become a professional if you're not. So that's why I always tell intellectuals in the marketplace, they can become mindful geniuses, provided they know how to handle the challenges of the day. And don't look beyond, look within yourself and see what's wrong in the system. And then build it. And I think that once they engage into this cross-thinking, cross-disciplinary thinking, we become powerful individuals, man. I mean, I remember when I in that space, I told you, when I founded the first Asia Pacific consultation on marketplace mindfulness, and one of the international guest speakers, he said, Charles, you are a genius, man. And this is the first time I'm hearing it, that you could come up with something called APCOM, which is the mnemonics for Asia Pacific consultation on marketplace mindfulness. And then I realized that all of us have that brain, we have created in the image of God, and that we don't use our creativity enough to help us live this life. And I think this is why, there's so much out in the marketplace that promises everything about finance and all the big blisses of life. But to me, like the body is the best pharmacy in the world. Your
It
brain,
produces some wonderful drugs within it. You're right in saying that.
it's the best pharmacy. Heal yourself. In other words, we have the mind to become a genius in the marketplace. The question is, are we willing to practice it, learn the skill to get us from where we are to where we want to be? And so this life-changing powered system, this ecosystem of these 7 mindful zones will help us get out into a place where we are confident that we will make the right decisions and choices. And I think that's important.
Yeah. There's nothing worse than doing something and then realizing afterwards you made the decision in a state of emotion. If it's positive, negative emotion, I like to make my decisions when I'm as close to neutral as possible, because then I don't have a bias either way. That's even if I'm too happy or too angry, don't make any too big decisions. I spend way too much money when I'm happy, and I get way too pissy when I'm angry towards people. Don't make those type of decisions. I've learned it the hard way.
Absolutely, absolutely. And this reactionary mode that I grew up in the bubble was because of past experiences. And a lot of us react because of past experiences, which can really blindside us to thinking positively and thinking with an open mind. And that's why I say that when you live from these 7 zones, it's getting out of your mind into your heart, because the heart is the wellspring of life. It's where manifestation takes place. And you manifest the goodness of God in this life through your heart, you see. And so once we have this M formula working, that keeps the cogwheels moving and makes life exciting. I mean, it's not easy, but it's hard work.
See, that's why one thing I do really appreciate about your system is you have that step of resplendence. That's difficult to say. I'll have to practice that one a few times before it comes out
I tell you,
smoothly.
it's my go-to zone,
Just because it gives you that time to connect with that inner self, that spiritual side.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's so rejuvenating that, in my practice, I talk so much about rejuvenation. And until radiance becomes personal, until that moment becomes personal, it's just another moment. But when we look back at the events of life, there are only certain moments that were really intense feeling was exasperated and experienced. Those are the resplendent moments that you can turn to, and no matter how small and trivial it may be, when I go back home, the first thing that comes up to me is my puppy, my poodle. And to me, that's a typical zone that I want to dive into, because no one else meets me at the door.
Living in that zone all day. It's living in that zone. Every dog, when they see their owner, that's resplendent.
That's right, and they can't tell you, but they experience it too,
Yeah, they don't have to say a thing. You can see it enough just by how happy they are.
Absolutely.
I think there's a bunch of stuff we can learn from animals in some sense.
Absolutely. But this is a world that's hurting. And many of us, like me, myself, got hurt without having an avenue to express it. And we pay a price for that, you see. And that's the reason why we need to be physicians of our own self. Not just look in, but what's wrong and how do we get it right? And I think this is why, at the end of the day, so much about the mind flow, the flow state of the mind. Have you heard of the flea mindset?
No, I don't believe so.
They did an experiment where they put some fleas, FLEAS, into a bottle and covered it for 3 days. And then they took off the cover, took off the bottle, and the fleas were just jumping in the same space because they did not know how to get out of that space. And that's the fixed mindset that we have as doctors, at least in the medical field, that we are so fine-tuned with tunnel vision about life, we forget the other side of it. And so I'm a big believer about the flow state of the mind. And that equals to the skills, you see. When your skill and your challenge match, you're in a state of flow. All right? If the challenge gets too high and your skill is too low, anxiety comes in. All right? And if the challenge is too low and your skills are too low, it gets boredom.
Yeah.
So when you keep your mind in that flow state, it's exciting, and that's why I lived with this fear for so many years. I didn't want to become like my father, and I ended up becoming like him because
Because you only thought about that thing.
there you go. And so fear takes a big hand in you, and because of that, I was so hard with my own children and scared that they would become like him and that kind of thing. And ultimately, I was just living another second life until, of course, there was such a vacuum in my life, and I met God, and He filled it. And that's where my whole perspective today is through the lens of spirituality, that you have a greater purpose in life, and that's very important. And that's why the word calling is also very, very important to all of us in life. We are called to where we are, and the question is, what do we do with it? And that's the way I look at it. When I look back 40 years of working, I wish I could relive my whole life with this R.O.S. system.
Yeah,
you
those
know,
moments come throughout life where you're like, should have known this from the start. That would have made things a lot better.
yeah. And I think these 7 zones, I mean, the way I look at it, and I would appreciate your thinking of it, is a powerful response mechanism where anyone can tune into any of these zones. It's just like, for example, you go and land up at the airport and they've got a smoking zone and a non-smoking zone. And if we have become so attuned to know which zone to go to, because if you go to the smoking zone, the end result is lung cancer. So same with our lives. We live our lives in the wrong zones, you see. And if we can go into zones that can help us build a system that produces fruit and gets us on the way of life, I think that's fantastic.
Yeah, talking to the system, I think it is important to have a system laid down, having that somewhat foundation, because you might be able to, in 80% of cases, give a mindful response without a system because you're able to catch yourself.
Right.
But there's going to be 20% of times where something extraordinary or extra happens where you're just going to go back to your neutral state. And if you have like that system, that foundation, you can neutralize to that, which is going to escape you from the moments I kind of referenced before with, because sometimes you do have to make a decision when you're really happy or when you're really sad. You can't wait until you're back in the middle. So you're going to limit the amount of extreme. You might still not give the best of answers or make the best of decisions, but it's going to be closer to the middle and not all the way to the extremes like it otherwise would have.
That's it. Absolutely. You said it. And that's why we live sometimes on the extremes of life. And how do we come to a balanced state? Because there will be instances of fight and flight. There will be incidents where you have to protect yourself for sure. But when they come to be really deliberate, conscious decisions, that's when mindfulness comes in. That's when the response state comes in. And the repercussions of what you choose. The choices we make, the consequences, we cannot judge them. We have an ultimate superior judge in heaven to judge us, but the consequences we cannot judge ourselves on. And so I hope that this has thrown some light into the life from 7 zones.
It definitely has for me. And for the people, of course, you talked about your podcast. That's going to be linked down below. But besides that, what would be, now kind of gotten a bit of a taste of what the 7 zones are, what would be a good place for the person watching go next?
Well, I think the website is a good one because the website, drcharleslee.co, or mindflowergonomics.com. There it gives all the 7 wheels of how you can, get into each particular cogwheel and how it flows, the state of flow. And I think that website is a good one to go to. And of course, some of my heart talk conversations that we do will throw more light into it. I hope to start off some webinars soon on the power of visioneering. I mean, because that's the main power that drives the whole system. If you don't have a vision, no system can work. So so that's the engine of the ergonomic system, and that is the visioneering system. because it's engineered. You see, the whole process in life is an engineered process that we go through. We're not just floating through life, and so we are in control of what we can control, and definitely our responses we can control, and that's something that is a gift. And if we can tune in our minds to how to respond to these challenges, I think we'll be much happier people.
I agree with that 100%. So I'll encourage people to go down, check out the links
Thank
Charles
you.
talked about down below.
Yeah.
Depending on when the webinars comes out and when this comes out, they might also be down there.
Yeah.
And thank you very much for coming on and having
My
a very
pleasure.
insightful conversation with me.
Yeah, I'm just about finishing my book on the 7 creative zones of a mindful genius, and I hope that that will be available soon, so people can lock in. But at the end of the day, allow me to leave with you that invitations can change your life. How you respond to an invitation can change the course of your life. And I think that our whole lives are nothing but invitations for success. The question is, how do we choose the right pathway towards it?
That's the perfect ending, so I don't even want to say anything else.
Well, thank you very much for having me, and look forward to more discussions with you, and maybe have some joint seminars together with all mindful people on how we can live this better life called abundance. Would be great. Thank you for having me.
That sounds like a plan. I like that.